So this is my 25-gallon Innovative Marine Fusion Lagoon aquarium. In here you can see I've got two very healthy brain corals, and I love brain coral. They are my favorite coral. They are one of the primary reasons that I'm in the hobby. If they didn't exist, I can't say that I would be as into the hobby as I am now. I also believe that that is why I've exited the hobby in the past, is when I was younger I didn't have the means to buy brain corals, but now that I am well into adulthood, it is something that I can fortunately afford every now and then. So, looking at my brain corals, they look great. They're super healthy, but this has not come without its stresses. There were lots of ups and downs with these brain corals. First off, brain corals can change size on a dime, especially if you've got these Welsophyllia forms. So if you've got the Trachyphyllias, they don't move as much. The Trachyphyllias are going to swell and contract. Really, the Trachyphyllia, you should only be scared if you've got like a really tight skeleton, like the flesh is really tight to the skeleton and it looks shrunk up, almost as if you took the coral and dropped it in some ice cold water and it, like, you know, shrunk up to nothing. Anyways, Welsophyllia, on the other hand, it swells, it does the opposite. And in my experience, this Trachyphyllia, when it tries to swell, it doesn't swell up that much, like not enough to like move it or like really change its shape too much, like it just looks puffy. Whereas a Welsophyllia, it'll swell up and actually be able to move throughout your aquarium about an inch every day. So it can just gradually move itself around the aquarium by changing its shape and then having the water flow kind of shovel it around. You can see the Welso is the one on the right, in the bottom right corner of my aquarium from the clip in the beginning. And that Welsophyllia will change its shape every single day. It'll be really small, it'll be really big, it'll be like lopsided, it'll be like up in the air, it'll be flat to the ground. Like, this coral can shapeshift. So here's what I mean. Check out this little montage. Anyways, now that you've seen the coral changing shape quite a bit, let's give the corals some food and see how much they change just from feeding. So these corals have a very, very strong feeding response. If you're not feeding your Welso and Trachyphyllia corals, then you're doing something wrong. These corals honestly need to be fed probably twice a week. Not large amounts of food either. I'm talking some mysis shrimp. You know, if you feed the fish frozen food, you can feed the same frozen food to your Trachyphyllia and Welsophyllia corals. And you want to try and get some of that food in each of their mouths. So if you look at the Trachyphyllia and Welsophyllia, they have multiple mouths on each colony. So my Trachyphyllia probably has like 4 or 5, and my Welsophyllia only has 2, I believe. With this in mind, you can give these corals food directly to the tentacles that extend, and the tentacles are very sticky. They will grab onto that food almost immediately. Now the problem with feeding, these corals take a long time to eat their food. I mean a long time, maybe an hour to 2 hours. So you really need some kind of feeding cage, and if you have any kind of cleaner shrimp or fire shrimp, be extremely careful with those shrimp, because once they figure out that these corals have food inside of them, they will just ransack the coral and tear it to pieces trying to get the food outside of the coral, because the coral does not digest this food immediately. It takes quite a while for the coral to digest the food and consume it, and the shrimps, unfortunately, will try and take that. Even like peppermint shrimp are also very aggressive in that way, and they do not care that these corals are 10 times their size. They could care less. So be careful with that, and especially fish like my clownfish, they will aggressively pick at the corals while the food is still on the coral, because the coral does take about 45 to 50 minutes to pull that food in, and then probably about another hour to fully close up. There are also concerns with the brain corals changing shape at night. So at night, my Welsophyllia will decrease to probably 1/4 of its size. So if you've ever gone to an aquarium store, you've seen one of these big, giant, puffy brain corals, and you've purchased it, and they've put it in a bag, and now it shrinks down to the size of a quarter, you're wondering, what in the heck is going on? I'm paying this much money for, you know, a 1-inch piece of coral or a 2-inch piece of coral that swells up to be 6 or 7 inches. That's what I'm talking about. At night, the coral will shrink back down to that size. Now, it won't always shrink down to that size, and I think there's a couple key factors for this. So, my alkalinity, I try and keep it around 8 to 8.5 usually, somewhere in that range. If your alkalinity goes really high, if it suddenly spikes to 8.8 or 8.9 or 9.3 or, God forbid, higher like 10 or 11, and the brain corals are used to 8, they will shrink up and be super upset for weeks. I mean, 2 or 3 weeks probably. So I film my videos usually about 4 weeks in advance. With that in mind, these corals will shrink up like crazy at night, and if your alkalinity swings like that, that could be one cause. Could also be if your alkalinity goes the other way. So I did have one day where my alkalinity was 7.3, if I remember correctly, and the 7.3 caused less of a dramatic effect, but still a dramatic shrink on both of my brain corals here. So getting alkalinity in that sweet spot and maintaining it there is crucial for brain corals. I would say that is number one for me, personally. The next thing is lighting for me. So my lighting, I recently set this tank up probably a month or two ago now, and I am using a Kessel A360X, or XE, I guess. It's Kessel's newest light, and I really do enjoy it. However, I'm running it right now in this video where you're seeing all this successful footage of the brain corals. I'm only running it at 20%. Now I'm trying to get that up to about 30% overall, because you can see, my leather corals in this video. If you notice, my finger leathers are stretching and things like that, and corals on the fringes, like my Duncan, are stretching a little bit, and that's because the coverage of the Kessel could be better. That's just a drawback of using a pendant light, where it's a single light source at the top. You do get that beautiful shimmer, but you do get a lot of shadows, unfortunately. So I do want to add two 12-inch AI blades to this tank. I'm just waiting to conclude my thoughts and my findings on my AI blade on my Peninsula 25 before I take that leap. Going back to the lighting, the intensity in particular, you want to increase intensity extremely slowly. So in my findings, I did try and increase the intensity to 30% and did a very gradual, like it was only 30% for like an hour, and then it would be like a 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 28, 26, 24, 22, 20, going up and down, like ramping up and down. And I was also trying to add in some violet, because these corals really do glow and shine when you put the violet light on them. That green really pops, and they almost get this like electric look to them. However, increasing that lighting caused my brain coral to just jump off a cliff. It suddenly shrunk up to its like little 2-inch size, and it just stayed that way for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I was honestly scared that I was going to lose the coral. And it wasn't deteriorating any flesh, there wasn't any receding skeleton, it would still eat if I put food in the tank, so lots of good signs still. But I was really terrified because, again, it's my favorite coral. I want to show you guys a successful reef tank, and then that way you can learn from me, because I believe, the best source of credibility is leading by example here. So as long as I can keep these brain corals successfully, I'll talk until the cows come home about how you can do this and replicate this in your own aquarium, and hopefully you can find success in it, because myself in the past, that's what my younger self was always trying to find, is the one-size-fits-all solution to reef tanks. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, but I can try and make it as simple as possible. So, going back to the lighting being too strong, the intensity being too high, I did have to dial everything back to 20%. I took the violet down to like 1%. So there's like pretty much no violet light on this tank now. And the corals are very happy again, which is interesting. So I am going to have to maybe scale the lighting up, but scale it up from like 20 to 22% for 3 or 4 weeks. And then from 22 to 24% over the course of the next month. And take it month by month, adjusting like 1 to 2% each month seems to be the right path forward with that. Outside of feeding and lighting and alkalinity, there are some other problems that you need to watch out for with brain corals. So phosphates are another huge problem. If you guys don't have a HANA phosphate checker, I would highly advise you buy one. Not sponsored by any means, just a personal endorsement for me. The phosphate checker from HANA just gives you a nice and simple readout of a numerical value within 3 minutes, and it's pretty accurate as long as you follow the instructions. With phosphates in mind, my phosphates jump around from around 0.05 to 0.09. Definitely within the acceptable range, albeit a little bit on the high side. I'd like to see it around like 0.02 to 0.05 ideally. With that in mind, I have used the RoaPhos media in my filter, and that has helped a lot. That has helped maintain my phosphates to 0.05, and what I'm finding with RoaPhos so far is that you can put it in the tank, and for the first week or two, it will drop your phosphates, and then it will maintain them from that point onwards. Obviously, you need to put in the appropriate amount of RoaPhos for your size aquarium, and I'm just using it in a bag in the back chamber in my all-in-one, so not the most effective way to use it. I could be using it in a reactor, something where it's constantly tumbling, right? And that would give it better surface area and use every bit of that RoaPhos possible. So far, I've had it in there for probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I'm starting to see my phosphates slowly creep back up. We're getting back to around 0.05 right now, 0.06, somewhere in there. So I probably will have to change it here in another like 2 or 3 weeks if it gets to like that 0.07, 0.08 mark. I also am feeding heavily. So right now in this aquarium, I'm really taking the approach of large nutrient input and large nutrient export. So I'm importing quite a bit of food by feeding, giving them frozen food almost every day, giving them flake food on the off days, and then doing water changes every single week. So right now I am doing probably 2 to 3 gallons every single week. And I'm also dosing Alpha-Reef, and I'm dosing fuel. So we'll get into that dosing stuff here in a minute to kind of talk more about my regimen there and my schedule. But the water changes, I would say, are helping a lot because the phosphate is primarily coming from food. And with that food, that is primarily where your nitrates are going to come from. And I guess that's a good thing to point out too. My brain corals, for whatever reason, do really well when the nitrates are like 30 plus, which is ridiculous because that's very high. I normally try and keep my nitrates down like 10 or 15. But when my brain coral was like just jumping off a cliff, I stopped doing water changes for those 3 weeks, and it came right back because the alkalinity kind of stabilized around 8. I was dosing like very regularly, like 1 mil of Alpha-Reef every single day rather than like 3 mils every other day type of thing. And I was getting the weekly water changes paused, and because they were paused, my nitrates started climbing, and then the brain coral started doing fantastic. So my nitrates are kind of constantly hovering right back up to that 30 at the end of the week, and then I do the water change, and then it drops it back down like 10 or 15. But again, that's primarily my feeding. So if I started feeding like every other day, or if I started feeding the aquarium less, I do have a pretty heavy load in this tank. I have 2 clownfish, 2 damsels, a neon goby, and I think that's it. That's what, 5 fish, right? There's not more. I'm trying to think if there's any more. I think that's it. I do want to add my coral beauty to this tank too, so some of you have commented that the coral beauty would look great in this tank. That is the goal. That is the plan. Going back to my dosing schedule, now that we've kind of talked about weekly water changes, 2-3 gallons a week, we've talked about nitrates being kind of high is seemingly helping the coral. And real quick on nitrates, I think the reason that it helps them, these Trachyphyllia and Welsophyllia corals come from tide pools. They come from like really dirty water. Like usually you can't even like see through the water. It's like churning. There's a lot of water flow, water movement. And they thrive in those little environments where there's a lot of nutrients there. So obviously our home aquariums are very different from that. So having higher nitrates probably mimics that environment a little better. Going through dosing though, I do dose Alpha-Reef, and I have been tracking it, just writing it down on a sheet of paper, and my Alpha-Reef has been kind of all over the place. Like I've had some weeks where I've had to dose it almost every day. I've had some weeks where I've had to dose it 2 or 3 times a week. And basically I go by testing. So I'll test the aquarium with my Hanna alkalinity checker, and I'll see, if my alkalinity is 8.4, I'll skip that day because it'll only drop down to about like 8.1 or 8.2 in my tank, just because I don't have that big of a load of coral. Like it's not like I have this tank absolutely stuffed with coral yet. So with that in mind, I'll dose, maybe Alpha-Reef the next day, and then that'll bring me from like, maybe it's 8.4, then it drops down to 8.1. I dose the next day, that brings me back up to like 8.5, 8.6. Primarily what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid jumping into that like 9.0 or higher range and trying to prevent falling below, that 8.0 range down to like 7. Outside of Alpha-Reef, I do dose Seachem Fuel. So Seachem Fuel is something I just started 2 or 3 weeks ago. I started dosing it for my zoas because it contains iodine in it, and it has the iodine solution is diluted with a bunch of other amino acids. So I was hoping that Seachem Fuel would be a safer way to dose things like iodine because I don't have a test kit for it. So I didn't want to just go get pure iodine dosing and start doing that. With fuel in mind, fuel and the amino acids I think are helping. They're definitely not hurting. I'm not seeing explosive growth yet, although it's only been 2 or 3 weeks, and nothing goes fast in this hobby. If you've been in this hobby for any length of time, you know that patience is the most valuable virtue. So with fuel, I am going to keep dosing it, and I've been dosing fuel twice a week. So once on Wednesdays, and then once on the weekend. So I try and get it, every 3 or 4 days throughout the week. I'm dosing the recommended dosage, so, well, I guess I'm actually dosing a little bit below the recommended dosage, because it says to use a capful for a 20 gallon, if I'm not mistaken. I have 25 gallons, and I'm using a capful on them. So I guess I'm dosing 80% of the recommended dosage, somewhere around there, 80-90%. So a little bit less than what they recommend. Now, I have seen that ever since I've been dosing that, the corals are definitely happier. They're fluffier, right? So they are, you know, responding positively. And interesting note, I've never been able to keep Montiporas very well in my aquariums, and I did have a fellow reef keeper gift me one, which was very nice, very kind of them. It was a donation to the channel, so to speak. And that Montipora is doing fantastic in my tank so far. The skeleton hasn't receded at all. I've had it now for probably 2 weeks, and it's doing fantastic. So I'm hoping that it will start growing. I don't know that I attribute that directly to Seeking Fuel. It could also be because my RODI system is pretty robust at this point. Just need some new filters soon. And my water change and maintenance is really dialed in. Like, I'm really on this tight schedule, which hopefully I can maintain. I'm a little worried someday if I have, you know, kids, how that's going to play out. We'll have to really plan out the maintenance then. But going back to the corals, they're all super happy. So brain corals, yeah, going back to the main topic here, keep all those parameters in check, keep your maintenance on a schedule, really start to note down what you're doing when your brain coral starts to look unhealthy. Warning signs, things that you should be concerned with, are if it has a really tight skeleton, like the flesh is tight to the skeleton. If you're seeing tissue receding, that's a problem. If you're seeing any injury to the coral, that's an issue. And if you're not feeding the corals, that could be part of your problem. And if you're giving it too much light. These corals like to be on the sand bed. They like to be in low par. I mean, I'm running a Kessel at 20%, and it's probably about 9-10 inches off the tank, so off the water line. So these corals are probably getting like 100 and I would say like 115 probably par at most, like something like that. Not anything too crazy. Maybe not even that, honestly. Maybe even lower. Anyways, if you guys want to treat your brain corals, I have heard of people doing like iodine solutions, like Lugol's, like a dip. You don't dose it directly to your tank. You like dip the coral in it for a couple minutes and then put them back in the tank after you rinse them off with like tank water so they don't transfer all that iodine to your display tank. I have heard of people separating the corals, into like low flow areas and stuff like that, where there's like, maybe if you have a quarantine tank, or, well, maybe not a quarantine tank, because you might have like copper in there, but if you have like a spare tank that you don't have any fish in or any shrimps in, you could try putting the brain coral in there, so that way the shrimps and the fish aren't picking on the coral as much. Maybe the flow's a little lower, the par is a little lower, the coral can really get stable and start to heal in an environment like that, where it's the primary focus rather than the fish. But other than that, guys, don't worry too much about brain corals. They're pretty low-stress corals once you kind of figure out their temperament, once you kind of figure out what they like and dislike. And once you get some experience with them, you start to realize that they're pretty simple. They just need stable parameters. They need to be fed once or twice a week. And they need maybe some slightly dirtier water, slightly more mature tanks. Like I would say you don't want to get one of these corals until your tank is at least like 1.5 to 2 years old. My tank is only 2 months old, but the filter media in the back of this tank came from my like 2 or 3 year old Fluval Evo 13.5 that I had. So all that rock and all that filter media from the Fluval got transferred into this tank. So effectively this tank is pretty much like 2 or 3 years old. It's just like it got transferred. The only thing that changed was new sand. I got new sand for the tank. I never transfer sand between aquariums. That's always given me bad results. I think the sand just traps a lot of nasty stuff. Anyways, guys, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and please, if you don't mind, turning on that notification bell icon. That would help the channel so much. We're trying to grow this channel, so if you guys could share this video, I would really appreciate it. If you know any fellow reef hobbyists that might enjoy my content, I'd really appreciate the share there. And yeah, definitely comment as well, guys. If you guys could comment and interact, I love responding to comments. I love hearing from you guys, so that would be awesome as well. And if there's any sponsors out there that want to sponsor the channel, just reach out to me. You can comment or just reach out to me via email, and I will see you guys there. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope your reef tanks are doing fantastic.